The sun sets over ancient Israel, casting long shadows across dusty streets. A lone figure hurries through the growing darkness, glancing over his shoulder like a hunted man. This is Jonah, a prophet of God. But tonight, a man running away from the mission of his life. Only hours ago, God's voice thundered in his ears. Go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it. Nineveh, the name alone strikes fear. Known for its cruelty and conquest, Nineveh is the heart of Israel's greatest enemy, the Assyrian Empire. Tales of their brutality, pyramids of skulls, torture chambers, haunt Jonah's people. To him, they are monsters deserving destruction, not redemption. But God has other plans. Jonah's journey is about to take him through storms, into the belly of a great fish, and to the heart of his own prejudices. Along the way, we'll discover the shocking breadth of God's mercy, a mercy so vast it sometimes angers those who think they understand it best. This isn't just Jonah's story. It's a mirror reflecting our own resistance to God's plans, our prejudices, and our flawed understanding of divine love. Like Jonah, we all face moments when God calls us to step out of our comfort zones. As Jonah hurries toward the port city of Joppa, he thinks he's escaping God. But sometimes, running away is just the beginning of running straight into his purpose. Dawn breaks over Israel, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. In his quiet home, Jonah kneels in prayer, as he has done countless times before. But today is different. Today, God's voice splits the morning silence like thunder. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it. Jonah's blood runs cold. Nineveh, the name alone conjures images that haunt every Israeli's nightmares. In the marketplaces, mothers whisper stories of Assyrian brutality, of cities razed to the ground, of walls decorated with the skins of conquered kings. Nineveh isn't just a city, it's the heart of an empire that delights in cruelty. Standing at his window, Jonah looks east toward Assyria, a 3-month journey through hostile lands to reach a city of bloodthirsty pagans. But it's not fear that makes his hands tremble, it's anger. These people, these butchers, have earned God's judgment. They deserve destruction, not a warning, not a chance at redemption. Why them, Lord? He whispers. Why show mercy to such monsters? But God's command hangs in the air, unyielding as stone. Jonah paces his room like a caged animal. He knows God's power. Hasn't he served as his prophet for years? He's seen God's mercy at work in Israel, watched him forgive his own people time and again. But Nineveh? The thought turns his stomach. As the morning wears on, Jonah makes a decision that will echo through history. If God wants to save Nineveh, he'll have to find another messenger. Gathering his coins and a few belongings, Jonah turns west instead of east. He'll go to Tarshish, at the edge of the known world, as far from Nineveh as a man can travel. In the port of Joppa, salt air fills his lungs as he approaches a weathered ship's captain. How much for passage to Tarshish? He asks, already counting out his silver. The captain eyes him curiously. It's not often someone books passage to the end of the world, but silver is silver, and soon Jonah is aboard, watching Israel's coastline fade into the distance. As the ship catches the wind, Jonah feels a weight lift from his shoulders. Surely God will find someone else, someone more suited to preach to Israel's enemies, someone who doesn't know their crimes quite so well, someone whose hatred doesn't run quite so deep. But even as the shore disappears, a small voice in his heart whispers a truth he can't escape. You can't run from God's presence. You can only run from his purpose. The sun climbs higher in the sky as the ship cuts through blue waters. Jonah doesn't know it yet, but his rebellion is about to stir up a storm that will shake not just his world, but the lives of everyone around him. And somewhere far to the east, Nineveh's streets buzz with life. Its people unaware that their fate hangs in the balance, all because one prophet couldn't accept that God's mercy might extend even to them. The Mediterranean stretches before Jonah like a blanket of blue silk, deceptively peaceful under the midday sun. He's found a quiet corner of the ship's deck, away from the curious glances of sailors who wonder why a holy man flees toward Tarshish. The gentle rocking of the waves almost convinces him he's made the right choice. Almost. Then the wind changes. It starts as a whisper, a slight shift in the air that makes the sailors pause in their work. The captain's weathered face turns skyward, reading signs that Jonah can't see. Within moments, the whisper becomes a roar. Clouds gather as if summoned by an angry god, turning day into twilight. Secure the cargo! The captain's voice fights against the rising wind. All hands on deck. The sea transforms from silk to fury. Waves rear up like mountains, tossing the ship like a child's toy. Seasoned sailors, men who've spent their lives on water, turn pale with fear. Each man cries out to his gods, their desperate prayers lost in the howling wind. But where is Jonah? Below deck, in the darkness of the ship's belly, he lies curled on his side. Even as death looms above, he sleeps. Not the peaceful sleep of the innocent, but the heavy slumber of one running from truth. The captain finds him there. "How can you sleep?" he shouts, shaking Jonah awake. "Get up, call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Above deck, the sailors have begun casting lots, seeking the cause of their misfortune. The lot falls to Jonah. All eyes turn to him as lightning splits the sky. They've seen enough to know this is no ordinary storm. "Tell us!" They crowd around him, voices urgent with fear. "Who are you? What have you done to bring this upon us?" Jonah looks into their faces, seeing their terror, and something inside him breaks. "I am a Hebrew," he confesses, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." A massive wave crashes over the deck, and he grips a rope to stay standing. "And I am running from him." The sailors' faces shift from fear to horror. They know about the Hebrew God, about his power. "What have you done?" they whisper. "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down?" Jonah looks out at the raging waters, and for the first time since hearing God's call, he sees his situation clearly. His rebellion hasn't just endangered him, it's threatening everyone around him. These innocent men might die because one prophet refused to show mercy to his enemies. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then it will become calm. I know it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." But these pagan sailors show more mercy than God's prophet had. They row harder, fighting the waves, trying to save not just themselves but also the man whose God they fear. Only when their strength fails, when the storm grows even fiercer, do they finally turn to Jonah's solution. "Lord, do not hold us accountable for taking this man's life." And it's strange to hear these pagan lips invoke the name of Israel's God. They lift Jonah, the prophet who would deny mercy to others now dependent on mercy himself. For a moment, he hangs suspended between angry sky and raging sea. Then the waters close over him. The storm stops as suddenly as it began. The sea becomes as smooth as glass, reflecting a sky now clear of clouds. The sailors stand in awe, trembling before the power of Jonah's God. They offer sacrifices and make vows to the Lord, transformed by witnessing his power. But Jonah sinks into the depths, descending into darkness. He thought he could flee from God's presence. Now, in the cold embrace of the sea, he's about to discover just how far God's mercy will go to rescue even those who run from it. Darkness, complete, consuming darkness. Jonah floats in the Mediterranean's cold depths, his lungs burning for air. This, he thinks, is how it ends. A prophet of God, drowned while running from his call. But as consciousness starts to fade, something massive moves in the water around him. Something alive. The creature comes like a living shadow, bigger than any fish Jonah has ever seen. In an instant, he's swept into its massive jaws. Not to die, though death might be preferable, but to begin the strangest 3 days of his life. Inside the great fish, time loses meaning. Hours blur together in the dark, humid chamber of its belly. The acids burn his skin. The stench is overwhelming. Seaweed wraps around his neck like a noose, a reminder of his near drowning. Every roll of the creature in the waves throws him against its flesh walls. There's no escape, nowhere to run. Finally, Jonah must face what he's been avoiding, himself and his God. "I called to the Lord in my distress," his voice croaks in the darkness. "And he answered me." Memory floods back, not just of his flight from Nineveh, but of every time God has been faithful while he is not. In this living prison, stripped of all dignity, Jonah begins to pray. Not the polished prayers of a prophet in the temple, but the raw cries of a broken man. "From the depths of the grave I called for help." His words echo in the creature's belly. "When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord." Hours pass, or maybe days. In complete darkness, with only the sound of rushing water and his own thoughts, Jonah faces truths he's been running from. Why does he hate the idea of Nineveh's redemption? Because he loves justice more than mercy? Or because he loves his own comfort more than God's purposes? Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. The words taste bitter in his mouth. Hasn't he made an idol of his own sense of justice? Hasn't he, God's own prophet, forfeited grace by refusing to extend it to others? On the third day, something changes. Maybe it's the prayer. Maybe it's the realization. Maybe it's simply God's timing. But the great fish begins to move differently, swimming upward toward shallower waters. "Salvation comes from the Lord," Jonah whispers, his final prayer in this strange sanctuary. And then it happens. The fish convulses. Jonah is thrown forward, pushed up through its throat. Suddenly there's light, blinding, brilliant light. The fish breaches the surface and with one mighty heave, expels Jonah onto a beach. He lies there gasping, his skin bleached and wrinkled from the fish's acids. The sand feels harsh against his raw skin. The sun burns his eyes after so long in darkness. But he's alive. More than alive, he's changed. Somewhere to the east, Nineveh still waits. Its people still need God's message. But this time, something is different. The man who walks out of the sea is not the same one who fled God's call. 3 days in darkness have taught him something about mercy, about grace, about the lengths to which God will go to save not just a city of sinners, but also his own runaway prophet. As Jonah stands on shaking legs, he hears God's voice again. Go to Nineveh. This time he doesn't run. 3 days into his journey, Jonah stands before Nineveh's massive walls. They loom 100 feet high, so wide that 3 chariots could race side by side along their top. The gates ahead are decorated with scenes of conquest, brutal reminders of Assyrian might. Jonah's throat tightens. Even after the fish, even after his promise to obey, something in him still rebels at what he must do. But he walks forward. The guards eye this strange figure. Bleached skin still bearing the marks of his time in the fish. Clothes stained with sea salt. Eyes haunted by what they've seen. They let him pass, perhaps too stunned by his appearance to stop him. Nineveh spreads before him like a beast sprawled in the sun. The city is so vast it takes 3 days to walk its length. Temples to pagan gods pierce the sky. The air rings with 100 languages. Merchants, soldiers, slaves all mingling in the streets. And everywhere, evidence of the empire's cruelty. Captives in chains, trophies of war. The instruments of torture displayed as public warnings. Jonah opens his mouth, and God's message pours out. 40 days! 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. His voice carries through the marketplace. People stop, stare. This stranger with his wild eyes and bleached skin, shouting about destruction. Some laugh, others pause, sensing something different in his words. An authority that cuts through their cynicism. 40 days. The words echo off stone walls. 40 days. He repeats the message street after street, neighborhood after neighborhood. No eloquent sermon, no careful explanation. Just 8 words over and over. Yet something extraordinary happens. The message spreads like fire through dry grass. Maybe it's the simplicity of the warning. Maybe it's Jonah's appearance, looking like a man who's seen the edge of death. Maybe it's simply God's timing. But the people of Nineveh begin to believe. It starts in the markets, spreads to the homes. Workers lay down their tools. Merchants close their shops. Someone begins to wail, a high keening sound of grief. Others join in. The sound of repentance fills the streets. Word reaches the palace. The king of Assyria, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, hears the commotion. When the prophet's message reaches his ears, something breaks in him. He steps down from his throne, strips off his royal robes, and covers himself in sackcloth. The ruler of the world's greatest empire sits in ashes like a common mourner. His voice shakes as he dictates a decree. By the command of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent and with compassion turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish. The transformation is complete. The city that had reveled in violence now fasts in repentance. Streets that had echoed with the cries of victims now ring with prayers for mercy. Even the animals are draped in sackcloth, sharing in their master's mourning. Jonah watches it all, his message complete. He should feel triumphant. Instead, something else stirs in his heart, an emotion he's not ready to face. Because as the sun sets over Nineveh, as thousands cry out for forgiveness, he realizes what he's feared all along. God will forgive them. The city of blood, the people he hates, the empire that has terrorized his people. They will receive the same mercy he received in the belly of the fish. And somehow that thought is harder to swallow than being swallowed by the fish. As darkness falls, Jonah turns and walks to the hills east of the city. He needs to see what will happen next. But more than that, he needs to wrestle with the hardest question of all. Why does God's mercy make him so angry? Here the story ends. Not with a neat resolution, but with a question that echoes through time. We never learn if Jonah finally understood, if his heart eventually aligned with God's. Perhaps that's the point. The story isn't really about Jonah's final answer. It's about our answer. Because we are all Jonah sometimes. We all have our Ninevehs, people or groups we'd rather God not forgive. We all struggle when mercy is shown to those we deem unworthy. We all sometimes care more about our comfort than others' salvation. But God's final question still stands. Should not the Creator care about all His creation? Should not mercy extend even to our enemies? Should not grace reach even those we think don't deserve it? The plant that shaded Jonah is long gone. Nineveh itself would eventually fall, its mighty walls crumbling to dust. But the lesson remains, challenging each generation anew. God's mercy is bigger than our prejudices. His love wider than our hatred. His grace more powerful than our judgment. And maybe, just maybe, when we find ourselves building shelters of bitterness, waiting for judgment to fall on others, we'll remember a prophet and a plant, a great fish and a greater mercy, and choose to align our hearts with the God who loves even our enemies. Because in the end, Jonah's story isn't just about a reluctant prophet and a repentant city. It's about the kind of heart God is trying to grow in each of us. A heart big enough to celebrate when mercy triumphs over judgment, even when that mercy reaches the people we struggle to love. The sun sets over Nineveh one last time in our story. But the question God asked Jonah still rises with each new dawn. What will we do with God's magnificent, frustrating, world-changing mercy?